Hey, oh, thanks for joining me. So, I'm someone who has dabbled in comic books a little bit throughout my life, but in general, I think I have really misunderstood comics and really underappreciated comics. I kind of just found them hard to get into and assumed that they weren't really for me. What I saw comics as was kind of based on a few broad categories rather than as a huge, expansive art form. So, I wanted to talk today a little bit about some of the barriers for me getting into comics because I think there's other people in similar boats to me where they may actually like comics, but they don't like maybe specific types or specific genres within comics. But because of how a lot of people are talking about and perceiving comics, they are not thinking that it's something for them. I also want to talk about how we change our minds because I think it's so important to reevaluate our views on things in general. And I love breaking down the things that kind of make me change or the things that maybe prevented me from changing sooner, just to kind of like be aware of them and just think about what makes us change our minds. I just want to start with talking a little bit about my timeline for comics because I have tried, like I said, a few times to get into comics in the past, and I just never really felt like they clicked for me. When I was younger, I was reading like hand-me-down Archie comics. My mom's friend would like donate us her son's comics, basically. I think I tried Calvin and Hobbes at one point, but I did not really vibe with it. And I would read the comics that were in newspapers as I could find them. So I did love that as kind of a light, low commitment read. I was a big reader as a kid. I loved reading books, novels, and so it was just kind of like, for me, a lighter way of reading. And then I moved and I didn't have access anymore to those hand-me-down comics. I didn't have access to those newspapers anymore in the town that I moved to. They didn't really have comics in their newspapers as far as I can remember. So it just was something that like slipped away from my life. And then I eventually did read some things in high school. Like there were web comics that I would see a little bit. And usually those were like more one-off comics. It wasn't like I was really following anything consistently in web comics. And I did borrow a couple of Scott Pilgrim books from a friend, and I thought it was okay, but I didn't really like love it at the time. I think I was supposed to read Persepolis in high school as well, and I think I may have just watched the movie. And then the next time that I had any kind of encounters with comics, I did try and read things like V for Vendetta and a Deadpool comic. I think I did try reading Watchmen at some point, but I did not finish it. And that was roughly that 2014 time. And then didn't really read anything until between 2019 and 2021, I did try reading The Boys and Invincible, just like the beginning bits. And both of those, it was like I really liked the show. And so I saw the show and then was like, oh, sure, I'll try reading the comic. And that's sort of the last time that I remember getting any comics until this year. So yeah, every time that I tried kind of from high school onwards, I felt like it wasn't for me. I felt like I just didn't like them besides like webcomics. So I'm just going to start out talking about some of the barriers that I have seen in comics specifically for me. So one is screen adaptations. And as you'll see on my little timeline, I did put like a little TV icon on a few of these because I realized a lot of the comics that I was reading were film adaptations that I had seen previously. So I liked the film adaptation and was like, oh, I'll read the book. And I think that kind of screwed things up for me because I did not really have a full understanding of comics at that time. I didn't have a full appreciation of comics as an art form. So to me, it was like, why would I read the storyboard when I can just watch the movie? So I have kind of changed my opinions on that over time, but I do think that for someone who is not very well versed in comics, if you are going to watch something that exists on screen, try to pick something that you have not seen before, or that you haven't seen in a very long time, where you are not going to be like like comparing things as much in your head. Because for me, that's really what like a large portion of the experience was. For right now, I'm trying to really avoid screen adaptations as I'm kind of diving back into comics. I'm really trying to stay away from those things that I have a big comparison with. So another thing that was a huge barrier for me was just like the misrepresentation of comics. So as I've kind of showed on my timeline, there were two major umbrellas that I saw comics kind of existing under. There was the comedy umbrella that like newspaper comics and Archie comics or Scott Pilgrim, they kind of existed under that comedy umbrella for me. And then there were the superhero comics, which was like V for Vendetta and Deadpool and Invincible and The Boys. And I don't think these categories are coming out of nowhere from my head. I did a few different image searches on different search engines, and basically all that comes up when you search comics under images is things that sit under that comedy umbrella and things that sit under that superhero umbrella. So I don't think it's coming out of nowhere. Like, this is what we are seeing. And there's so much more than just those two umbrellas. And to be honest, like those two umbrellas just did not really appeal to me. Like the comedy stuff is fine, but I just didn't see it as like a very serious art form. I didn't see it as something that had a lot of depth to it. And then on the superhero level, like it's fine. I just really, I'm kind of sick of seeing anything superheroes. Like it's too much. I just don't feel like going down that route. So it kind of felt like I just was not seeing things that really intrigued me. So many of the videos that are like comic channels and so many things that are related to comics are talking about superhero comics. And it's just like, there's so much more. There is so much depth that can come from comics. But we're just not getting there in terms of how we are showing it to general audiences. So I think it really does kind of prevent a lot of people from getting into comics because we don't see it as this like wide open art form where there's tons and tons of variance. And another way that I kind of realized I was thinking about it, and I don't think I'm alone in this again, was that I was seeing comics kind of as more of a genre than as an art form or as a medium. Now I kind of see it more as like a cello, an instrument that, yes, there are some genres that it may appear more in, but a cello can be in so many different genres. And same with comics. We have a few genres that comics may be in more frequently, but that does not mean that we cannot have a whole host of other genres. But I just really wasn't aware that there was that much variety within comics. There really wasn't that much that I was seeing kind of at the forefront. I was mostly seeing superhero comics, and that's what my brain attached to. Another barrier that I found was cost. So I do think that comics can be kind of expensive to get into, especially if you don't know what you're doing. For me, I've been really trying to read a lot of things from the library and just try and find things that are like discounted at bookstores. Like sometimes they have like used sections or they have like a discount area. So I've been kind of scrounging those to find comics that I may be able to get at a more affordable price. Another thing is the serialization and like how book comics can sometimes be compiled can be really intimidating for a new reader. I myself have been like trying to kind of stick with things that are kind of in a single format or like a single entity. So like a graphic memoir, I really like that it's usually like you can get them kind of all in one, or a collection that's just kind of maybe come out in those single issues, but it's all compiled in one. So with single issues, like it just feels like a tease to me. Like it just feels like you don't get that much of a payoff. I'm okay with teasers with volumes, like to see what I like. So I've got a few that I'm gonna try. So for example, I've got like Monstrous and Horror Country that I don't really know much about, but I'm gonna give it a try. And they have like a few single issues collected into a volume. I'm okay with that to see if I like it and then collecting more volumes. As long as it's not like a crazy long series, that's approachable for me-ish. But single issues just feels like way too much work. Like, are you telling me I need like 6 to equal one of those books and I have to like seek them out and they also don't look as nice. They also don't sit on a shelf nicely. Like, it just, to me, does not make a lot of sense, but different strokes for different folks. Another thing is accessibility. So comics are not really sold everywhere in every single bookstore. A lot of bookstores will have like a small graphic section, basically. So sometimes it can be hard to actually see all that's out there. On top of that, like, a lot of comic book stores are kind of intimidating. I recently went to a comic book store for the first time in a while, and I was like, and this was the first time I was like going in. I think a couple of the other times I had like a book in mind that I was looking for. And this time I was just like trying to find things that I might like. Granted, I did not ask any staff member for any guidance at all, but I just kind of went in and took a look and tried to see what appealed to me or if there was anything that called out to me. And it was really, really hard for me to find anything. There was one book that stood out to me amongst like everything that I saw. And that was a book that looked so different. And that was kind of what made it stand out. I'm so glad that I saw that book. But it also was like the only thing that stood out to me in that store. So I will also add that some comic book stores are pretty much exclusively selling singles, which is fine, but it just is not the most approachable thing for people who have no idea about comics. It also does kind of lead more to that like nerdy image and that superhero image. I feel like a lot of the times that I see singles, it's superhero stuff. It's things that are like expensive sometimes beyond explanation for somebody who's just like jumping into things. So I just find that there's a lot of ways that we make it intimidating for people to get into. I've found personally bookstores where they just happen to have a graphics section are a lot less intimidating than going to a comic book store, not knowing if they're a comic book store that like exclusively deals with singles pretty much, or if they're or if they're a store that has a lot of graphic novels, a lot of variety. You kind of have to like check that out online, or you just go in and risk walking in and realizing this is not the place for me. And it's just one of those things where if you're aware of it, it's fine. But if that is your only exposure to comics, if that is like your only comic book store that is around you, then it can feel like the world of comics is very small, when really it is huge. It's just we're not seeing that representation. At least from my experiences, these are what I've seen. And yeah, I tried like even going to a comic book like show the other day, and it was pretty much exclusively singles. I realized, nope, not the place for me. But it's just something that if you were like, oh, okay, there's a comic book show where they're selling comics, I will maybe be able to find something. And if you don't know that there's so much variety, and that's just like such a small part of what there really is for comics, then it could be something that prevents somebody from looking into comics further. If you don't have a physical place where you can kind of explore books and figure out like what appeals to you, what art style you like, it's kind of hard to do all of that online, in my opinion. Yes, there are like ways to kind of work around that, but there's something about physically like seeing a book and being able to like just see how you vibe with the art style, just seeing how it calls to you, that you can't always do online, in my opinion. One other thing I want to say that I think was really a barrier for me is I truthfully did not really understand the language of comics. Now, this might sound silly for some people, like if you have grown up understanding, like reading comics and it's been fairly intuitive for you, or you just never had problems with it, then this might not sound like that big of a deal. But for me, like there was something about like comics and the language of it that I did not click into right away. I just really didn't think much of some of the conventions of comics that can make things flow differently. And we'll talk a little bit about how I learned that in my next part of this video. But yeah, I don't think I understood like the way a panel can make you linger or make you go quickly, like just with the way that it flows. I did not really think about time in comics. I did not really think about the flow in comics. I did not think about the way that sound is used in comics. All these things that like maybe come intuitively to some people, but it did not for me. And I think that was something that kind of until I got an appreciation of comics, until I really saw them as like a very interesting art form that actually does provide a lot, I thought like it was just kind of lazy writing. I honestly did not see all that goes into it. I don't blame myself for kind of being caught up by a lot of these barriers. I don't blame myself for kind of getting swept up in some of these ignorant ways of looking at comics, because there's so many things that kind of contributed to that belief. But I am really glad that I have changed my mind. I am really glad that I have started to actually seek out comics and try to see more of what there is to offer in terms of comics, especially outside of those two main umbrellas. So what changed my mind? Basically, it came down to me just like reading a few things that really cemented that I maybe had a misunderstanding in comics. So one of them was Linda Berry's books. I read some of her like how-to books first, and then I read her comic books, and they're like compilations of some of her comics that were like, I think more like weekly strip releases. But there's so much like depth to those characters. I love her characters and I love the way she writes. I love the way that she approaches difficult issues with her characters. She helped me to see that even things under that comedy kind of umbrella had a lot more depth to it than I initially had really given thought to, that I had really considered. So Scott McCloud has 3 books that are comics about comics, and 2 of them are ones that I've read, Understanding Comics and Making Comics. Both of those books really helped me to see comics in a different way. With those 2 books, I saw what comics can be. And it was such a good example of like how you can learn with comics, and also how you can like communicate things. And it showed like things about the comic language in a way that really made sense to my brain. And I also loved that it gave examples of so many different types of comics. And that just kind of gave an appreciation for me of like how much variety there is in art form, in how people approach comics. There's just so much variety. And it really made me realize that there was a lot that I was probably missing out on. I just started reading, I guess, like more books that were by one sole person. And I think that really helped me to see comics as like this real communication tool. I love seeing what somebody's dance between words and pictures that they can do themselves. Even if like the drawings are kind of more rudimentary, I kind of love that. Now that I've realized that I do like comics, and I've tried some that have really helped me to gain a stronger appreciation of them, I'm going to try kind of slowly getting into some comics that are by other creators, like where there is a team working on it, and also some things that are kind of out of my usual. The books that I've been picking out now are ones that appeal to me for like one reason or another, but it's not necessarily that it calls out to me based on the subject matter. It's like one thing has sold me on it, and I'm allowing that to be enough because of how low commitment just checking things out that our comics can be. And honestly, that's kind of great for my ADHD brain. Like, I kind of love that I can just dive into like all these different worlds, and it feels like a lot less commitment than reading like a novel. I made this video planning on just doing a one-off video on comics and how I've changed my mind on comics, which we've gotten to. However, I realized that I have a lot more that I want to talk about with comics, because it's just something that like now I'm like, wow, where have these been all my life? Why? Like I just need to like catch up. I'm gonna just make a new channel where I talk about the books that I've read and my opinions on them, and try and do like basically a trailer for the book where I talk about it to see if you have never heard of this book before and you want to know like what it's about without like then I will try and do like a little bit of a teaser kind of thing, and then also do a little bit of a chat on like my takeaways. I don't know. It might be interesting to hear from like a person who's just getting into comics. I don't know. We'll see if anyone's interested, but I decided I'm going to give it a go because there seems to be a gap in YouTube, in what is on YouTube. So yeah, if you are interested in more stuff related to me talking about comics, then I will link my new channel in the description. Thanks. Take care. Bye.